Hi everyone, welcome to another session of the Birthday Salon. Today we're really excited to have with us Ustazah Liyana Rosli Asmara from the Harmony Center. Now, Ustazah Liyana wrote us a really nice, reflective article on how COVID-19 has affected the way she practiced her faith. There are many questions that we would like to ask Liyana today. And of course, with me today is Hazirah.
Hello.
Yeah, and if I can just jump straight in, right, Liyana, what does the title before your name mean? What does Ustazah mean?
So basically, the term Ustazah, in a general definition, it means someone who provides Islamic knowledge and guidance to the community. So basically, that is like the general understanding of the definition. But probably it will also be very helpful if I just give a little bit of context, especially based on Singapore context. So now if you are saying like who is an Ustazah, whether if the person studied Islamic religious knowledge, does it suffice to, to just give them the label? Here in Singapore, it is also very important that they also have to be certified under the Asatiza Recognition Scheme, which is a scheme under the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore, where each of these individuals have to undergo certain courses and trainings to ensure that they are able to practice and provide proper guidelines to the community. If you see our current context, it's no longer like a situation where whatever knowledge you have, you will just merely provide to the community. Because of the interchangeable landscape and many various issues that arise based on certain factors that are happening around the world, I think it's also very important that apart from giving the religious knowledge, Asatiza or like the Ustazah must be someone who is also able to understand, make the effort to do some ground sensing, to have a better picture of what's going on within the community. It must also be someone who project an inclusive traits, because we are also in a multi-religious society. So it is equally important to not only know what's going on within your Muslim community, but also having a better understanding and appreciation on the larger context of the society.
Right. Thank you so much, Liyana, for that beautiful introduction. It gives me a lot of food for thought. And that last point that you mentioned, the importance of having inclusivity, that element there, I noticed also in your article that you are an interfaith advocate. And I find that very interesting. So I'm wondering though, if you're okay with sharing, how do you get into interfaith advocacy? And I can imagine, that last point about being inclusive would help, with your interfaith activities. But could you share a bit more on this?
Yes. So basically, personally speaking, beyond my professional work, building an interfaith relationship has always been of my interest. Because when I was still a child, back then during a kindergarten school, my parents would always allow me to play with the children from the neighborhood areas. And they usually tend to be from people of different faith and race. So I am very used to mingling with my Indian neighbors and with my Chinese neighbors. And I enjoy that moment a lot. So I guess when I grow up, when I see some things, when they invite me to my house and I see altars and then I see some religious festivities that they observe, it makes me also very curious. And that actually helps me to develop an interest towards multicultural communication and multicultural studies. So of course, that also sort of inevitably, it's sort of like, overlap with the idea. In order to know a person apart from the culture, there are other areas like religious identities also play a part. So that is how it sort of helped me to embark into the whole idea of an interfaith journey.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm hearing a lot of very powerful values that really help in the work that you do, Liyana. For example, being inclusive and also adopting this curious disposition, as you mentioned very nicely. Yeah. I'm just curious, going back to your article, you mentioned quite a fair bit of both challenges and maybe opportunities that COVID has presented itself as you practice your faith. I was just wondering whether or not you could share a bit further about what was one biggest opportunity that COVID presented to you as you practice your faith. Yeah.
There are two things that I personally find it's very meaningful, that I can sort of revisit again this idea during COVID. Number one is reconnecting and strengthening my relationship with God. Because I guess, you're living in Singapore, sometimes it's naturally you get busy all the time. You are always on the move. And then suddenly COVID sorts of there are certain period of time where suddenly it tells you to slow down everything and reset your button. And then it sort of, helped me think like, if you talk about in terms of percentage, whether my percentage of distributing a certain time towards spirituality and distributing time towards a more physical work, is it balanced? So that helps me to question every now and then. So that's number one. and how I can make improvements upon that. Number two, I think the other blessings is that I get to read more and get to interact more with the people whom I may not be able to do that much before COVID. So for example, I'm also a co-founder of a Giving Back Beyond Faith, which is actually an initiative to bring young people together to have an integration program between Singaporeans and also the migrant workers. So before the COVID, I mean, most of the time, there's a lot more, work to do in terms of my professional work. But during COVID, it helps me to read a little bit more about them. I've also began this hashtag migrant diaries where every alternate day, I personally text some of the migrant brothers that I know just to ask them how's life, what are the things that they like. And then it sort of become like a diary for me to understand their favorite food, their fear, their hopes. And that sort of give me comfort to feel that I'm not just thinking about myself, but I'm also taking this opportunity to also to reach out others and perhaps trying to practice more empathy and appreciation towards their struggles. Yeah. And also their determination of, surviving and being resilient in these difficult times.
It is really interesting in that the time of COVID where I think most of us decide to, I guess, like shrink our worlds a bit, right? Because with the circuit breaker, because if you're at home, then you might focus a bit more on your family relationships or like the people who are immediately close to you. But what you have seemed to do with the time is to actively build relationships with people who are not within your immediate circle of, like maybe without your immediate physical circle. I think that's how I would put it. Yeah, and I just find that very inspiring, and I think very, how do I say this, very encouraging. Yeah, because I think that most of us don't have that space to reach out, but you found that space because you found that it was important for you to think beyond yourself and your immediate circle.
I think, at least for me, what was very moving in what you shared about the migrant diaries endeavor that you're going about is you said something in your own words. Every now and then I check in with my migrant brothers. I think that's such a powerful term that you just used. The relationship that you share, they are family of sorts, And I think what you just shared about the way you have framed COVID and seen it as an opportunity for expanding the circle outwards, like what Hazirah is sharing. It's very, very moving. I think it's something that we can all learn as well. Yeah. The flip side of opportunities are obviously challenges. I'm just wondering, what are some perhaps big challenges that you have faced that COVID has posed to you as you go about living your faith?
I think one major challenge that I'm facing is psychologically trying to accept that currently your comfort space is also the space that you need to work. It's also the space that you need to find comfort and solace. It's also the similar space that perhaps you need to interact with your family members. Because I guess, in the time where you have to go to the office, you are so used to divide the rest time and the working time and then your prayer time. And now most of the time, all these spaces now become into 3 or 4 in one package. Yeah. So I guess trying to sort of pacify your psychology. Okay, how do you balance this up? Sometimes you are, let's say for example, you are taking your time for prayer, and then at the corner of your eye you see your laptop there, and then you might probably start thinking, oh, I haven't finished completing these items, or so on and so forth. So how do I make that balance? Yeah. And I guess being someone, someone who's very used to talking to people all the time. I mean, in the center, we welcome people. I always enjoy meeting different people. And I do realize that it sort of affect the social skills as well. Even if, let's say, you meet someone physically out there for coffee now, perhaps it takes you more than 5 minutes to figure out how to talk as per normal and yeah. So those are the things that, when I have sort of a check-in with my friends and ask them, do you also experience this? And they will also like, oh right, yes, I'm also experiencing this and I don't know how to deal with it. Like suddenly my communication skill just flung. I just don't know what else to talk anymore. Yeah. So we are also trying to sort of help each other. Perhaps will having a reading club help? Do you think maybe we should occasionally meet help? Yeah. So those are some of the challenges that I'm facing.
Right. So I'm going to be curious and push your point a bit further, Liyana.
Yes.
So, I mean, the first one is a bit more frivolous. The second one a bit more perhaps meaningful, but I'll leave it up to you to make sense of it. So the first one is you mentioned about, how social skills necessarily have been affected given COVID, right? And how you meet your friend at the coffee shop in kopitiam and maybe don't know what to talk about. I just wonder whether or not maybe the calling here is to just hold silence with each other, And maybe COVID, as you rightly pointed out, has slowed us down to an extent that maybe just the presence of a person is enough. The gift of seeing a person is enough. And therefore, the mental capacity of speaking and everything just falls short because, wow, I get to meet you face to face and have coffee. That's enough. I can't, nothing else that I can say may potentially do much justice to the moment, So I thought that was just a small frivolous point to just share with you that maybe we live in a noisy world. And maybe sometimes in that sense, just holding back and being present is enough. So the more significant part I thought I was reading to you is, I was very moved in your COVID-19 reflection on the Birthday Collective website. You mentioned about how chapter 2 of the Quran mentioned something about testing of fear and hunger, right? And it has taught you to reflect on many privileges that you have. I thought that was a very powerful moment as I reflected on that as well, because your point, about the challenge of having the workspace, the comfort space, the prayer space, and now being all conflated into one space. I wonder whether that in itself is an acknowledgement of a privilege, right? That I used to have all of these various spaces that I could compartmentalize my life very well. But maybe right now, maybe the calling here is to recognize the privilege and to allow for the integration of that spaces together. I really like that moment where you say like, oh, I want to pray, but then now my laptop on the left, then I'm just like, oh, But I think that's so real and so authentic, And it's not as though we should not separate time because you should separate time for prayer and whatnot. But I think that just makes it all the more messy. And I think you mentioned this in your article, the complexity of human reality in this period, right? So yeah, I just wanted to just share those reflections with you and wonder whether you had any responses to that. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you're totally on point about, exploring silence. In fact, I thought one of the profound things that I've sort of discovered during the COVID is also discussing about what does silence means to some of, within my friends. So some of them, they, couple of them, they were suggesting, oh, I've attended some spiritual retreat. Some few others of them, they say oh, I took a walk and I make it a routine. And then eventually it helps me to calm down. And those are also some of the areas that I explore. And in fact, this also relate to your second question about, making sense and perhaps, having that attitude of accepting the reality right now and how to make sense of this mess. It's also perhaps why having a moment of silence is also very important before you start to delegate yourself into these different spaces. Different roles in the same spaces lah. So I definitely agree with that, and that is also something that I'm trying to practice in a more disciplined manner. So before I delegate the my tasks, before the prayers, before the work delegation, before the family bonding, I start first with having that silence just to, sort of clear everything first, and then slowly seek the clarity of the mind, and then do all the necessary, for example, the zikr, the remembrance of God, before start rolling out what are the things that I need to do today, what are the things that I'm grateful today, and so on and so forth.
I feel like a lot of our recent conversations have somehow ended up on this note. Not ended up, but I think a lot of them have developed to this point where everyone's just you know what, we have to sit down and really reflect on what's happening and to, have that time together ourselves, which is really important. Yeah, no, I completely relate to this, idea of all the spaces being put together because, so as you shared, sometimes your workspace is also your prayer space, also where you sleep and where you eat. And just as a reflection to this, because my family has 7 people, which is challenging when we're all trying to find spaces to do work where we don't all hear each other. So for example, if my father's on call, if my mother's on call, then my sister's in class or my brother is in class and I've also have to be in class, there's no way that we can configure the house such that we will not hear each other in each other's calls. So there was a point where we talked about sectioning off the living room into different working spaces, but then the greatest loss to that would be we would have no space to pray together as a family because there was no other space that could fit the 7 of us together. Because of that, we haven't done anything to the living room because we maintain that prayer space felt more important than to have a productive space for all of us. Yeah.
I have something to add on that as well. I think one thing that is also at least useful for me is that to also be very compassionate towards yourself. Don't expect that you can do everything perfect within this, these 4-in-1 spaces. It's also a conversation that I had with friends that sort of made me reflect, because especially most of my friends, they are mothers. So they are working, they have children to manage, and then they have, like whatever house chores, cooking, so and so forth. And then I asked them, like, so how do you manage now? Because that spiritual activity is also at home. You also have, on top of that, your child have your home-based learning and so on and so forth. And one thing that I realized is that a couple of them gave me this smile emoticon and say, like, some things I have to give a miss, and then I'm just telling myself it's okay. And I have to accept that there are a couple of times, in order for you to achieve something, you have to sacrifice something else as well. And that has always been an ongoing journey for them to try to make improvements. So that, sort of make me think so much about, if I am in this situation, and when I look at them, then I felt that, wow, that, that's a very powerful way of reflecting, because again, it's also again back to the idea of like acceptance. You're trying your best. There's also a trial and error. There are times where you are at your peak, you are able to be productive. There are times that you are just not in the zone at all. But yeah, how to be compassionate and emphasize that self-care so that you can continue do what you need to do. Yeah.
Let me build on that, Liyana. I think that was so beautiful and so profound. And correct me if I'm wrong, one of the 99 names of God is also the all-compassionate, right? And I think that was such a powerful moment where you said, I think it's not so much about being compassionate to other people, but compassionate to self. And I'm wondering whether, from your perspective, how has COVID taught you to perhaps be more compassionate to yourself? What are some strategies that you've realized that actually the Liyana now is a bit more compassionate than the Liyana of previous times? Yeah.
I think there are few things that I'm currently practicing in trying to be more that self-reflective mode. So like, for example, whenever I wake up in the morning, the first thing that I need to, usually when we wake up in the morning, you just need to like, okay, routine, need to do my prayer already and then start work. But before that, what I'm trying to do right now when I wake up, I will start to think the first 3 things that I'm grateful about. The moment that I wake up, that I can still breathe, that maybe there's some nice fragrance smell in the air, because my neighbors, the one upstairs, it's of a different faith, and sometimes they have some scent that they burn. It's quite refreshing. So sometimes when I wake up and I smell that, I'm like, oh, what a beautiful day.
Oh, wow.
That becomes part of the point that I'm like, I'm grateful that I can still smell. And then perhaps, number 3, maybe like, okay, I can still feel the whole organ of my body. It's still moving and so on and so forth. And then after that, then I will start thinking about, okay, what are the next 3 things that I need to do for today? And on top of the next 3 things, there's a next 3 things. So basically, I have like 12 things that I usually have.
Well, your KPI very high.
Yeah, but the next 3 things is also important, because this is where I need to think about what are the 3 things that I want to do as part of a self-care for today. So it can be like, okay, maybe today I want to eat, I don't know, fruits or maybe chocolate that will help me to, to make me happy. Or maybe today, after I'm done with certain work, I want to watch Netflix. So having that in my mind would help, sort of like give you ease, like, okay, there's something that I can look forward to today, apart from, the normal tasks. And also, more importantly, before all this, I have expressed my appreciation towards God lah. I think that was very helpful compared to before COVID, where you just wake up like, okay, you just want to do whatever that you need to do, and then after that you are just very, very tired, and then you just want to go to bed, and you hardly have a proper time of reflection.
I think what I really like about your response to that question on being compassionate to yourself, Liyana, is about gratitude. And I think that's so interesting that compassion comes naturally through being aware of one sense of gratitude. And I think that your point about how your neighbor, if maybe is of a different faith and certain smells, you framed it as grateful. And you framed it as like, wow, it's so fragrant, so nice. I'm not sure whether that is necessarily, or rather, let me frame it the other way around. I think that's great that you are able to give thanks for that. And I just wonder whether more of us can have that kind of a disposition, rather than seeing it as annoyance or nuisance, you celebrate that diversity, and I think that's very beautiful.
You're not the first one to say that. I made similar comment last time when I was traveling, and then someone burned a stand of roses. Then I was like, oh, what a beautiful morning. But for the other person, they were like, wow, how did you find, how did you find gratitude and meaning in such, like, people burning roses? For me, I just need to see 6 o'clock means I need to get ready to work. No time to think about all these little things. But along the way, I do find like if you can start being more appreciative towards the little things around you, that will also help you to build a more positive way and in seeing things. And especially if you look at COVID, we don't have the power to change COVID, right? It's not like you have this one formula and tomorrow everything will be back to normal again. It takes a lot of time, a lot of adjustment. And which is why I cannot emphasize enough, if that's the way and things has become more uncertain and this is the new realities, then how can we make our living presence more meaningful? And that is something that I'm trying to do, even if just looking at the grass, or maybe a community cat come and visit my house and feed him, and that is already something that makes my day.
Yeah. No, this just reminded me of something that happened in class yesterday, because my tutor asked us, "Oh, what is your small win for the week?" And she like, you, what's a small win for the week? And the first person who she asked was a bit taken aback. And then she said something about the lines of like, yeah, all of you think, when you want to think of wins, you tend to think of big things, like what are the big successes that you have, but you don't focus on the smaller things that help you to get through the day. I think she was just trying to make this point about how you should, really, really appreciate the small things. So when she asked me, I wanted to say, I did this thing and it went really well, and my assignment is on task. But what came to mind instead was that in that morning when I was preparing to go to school, and I was like semi-awake, like very upset, not having enough sleep. My younger sister, who's 10, like came up to me and suddenly hugged me, and it was one of those things where I was just like, I did nothing to deserve this. She just decided that she wanted to bless me with this small, like, bit of happiness. And I was just like, yeah, this is a small win, small happiness for the week. Which also then made my commute to school much, much less painful, because then I felt less angry at having to be awake. Yeah.
Right.
I think that's very beautiful. I'm also called to reflect about perhaps what are some of the small wins that we can celebrate together, both like within our family, within our immediate communities, and I think like what Liyana was sharing with us, also in our virtual communities, right? Like what are some of the small wins that we can celebrate in these larger ecosystems? I'm very moved by two things. Amongst the many things I'm very moved by today, I'm actually most moved by two things also that Liyana has been sharing, because going back to your topic on silence, Liyana, I think what was very interesting is that your definition of silence doesn't seem that it is one of the absence of noise. It seems like silence is the dwelling place of something larger, or it's fulfilling rather than limiting. And I think there's something very beautiful about that. Where it's as though like you invite yourself into silence, you partake in this sense of silence, and there's this very beautiful sacred moment, that you have been sharing. And secondly, I think that point that you mentioned, that we can't change the situation overnight and things like that. I think just now also you mentioned something like compassion to self also requires one to accept one's reality. And I think that's also a very powerful moment where maybe some of us, we are nostalgic, we long for the time that was before, but perhaps that also is a temptation for bringing us away from the now and the present moment. And I think these are some of the large nuggets that I'll be taking away and reflecting for the rest of today, and hopefully for more. I don't have communicats visiting my place. I don't have a sister who's 10 years old hugging me, but nonetheless, I have. I will be grateful for other things. But yeah. So maybe before Hazirah summarizes our conversation, I just wanted to ask Liyana, do you have any like comments, questions for us as well? Yeah.
Well, I guess a question that I have for you is that, what could be that one most important value that you hold to yourself as you try to accept this new reality? The most important value, just one.
The most important value for me at this juncture is recognizing that I am limited, right? Recognizing that there are inherent limitations in all of us, and recognizing it doesn't necessarily mean being resigned to it. I think there's a difference there. And sometimes, increasingly so, recognizing my limitations is paradoxically very liberating. To realize that, I cannot do this. Like what you just shared with your examples of your friends who are mothers. I just cannot juggle it hate things right now, and I need to be okay with, going back to some of our other conversations that Hazirah mentioned, I need to be okay with letting go of certain things that I cannot control. Even things that are within my control, so I maybe cannot control as well as before, and I think maybe that recognition of one's limitation comes very nicely to Liyana, your point about being compassionate to self. Maybe part of that compassion is that very inherent recognition that I'm no Superman, I'm human, just like everybody else, and I hurt, I feel pain, but I also feel joy and I feel gratitude. So that's for me, the recognition of my limitations. Yeah. Hazirah, how about you? Yeah.
I think for me it's a bit about it's a lot about listening to myself and the idea of patience, because I think I'm the kind of person who likes things to be done in a certain way to a certain degree or standard. But then because of the circuit breaker, I've been surrounded by a lot of people, and people are not one of those things that you can pull to a certain standard, right? Because other people have their own strengths and frustrations and all those things. So what's helped me is to just okay, if I'm frustrated about this, I have to figure out whether or not it's within my control. So it's very similar to what Chris has mentioned about letting go of certain things, because you know that they're just not going to be done to the way you want them to be, and it's not wrong, or it's not my fault, it's not the other person's fault, because we all have our own things of what's important.
It is what it is, right? What you were saying, yeah, Hazirah. Yeah, cool.
Oh, so much for your sharings. Yeah, that was very beautifully expressed. Yeah, so something for to continuously reflect as well. I thought I just want to share just one quote.
Please do. Yeah.
And I guess regardless what your situation is, because I don't have a solution to everyone, because the contexts are different. I can only know and resonate to my own personal struggle. But I think what at least as a Muslim, what is always helpful for us is always to find that moment, whether it's a silence or it's a silence with a certain action. It's always very helpful for us to do, for example, what you call it as a zikr, the remembrance of God, because it helps with the tranquility of the heart. And then apart from that, there's one quote that I really like from the book Man's Search of Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And
yes.
It has always been inspiring me since my secondary school. So there was one quote in which, if I can share here, it says that ever more people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live. It has always, makes me think, it's so easy to talk about if you have the means, you can do this. If you don't have, then you don't, in terms of the economic structure, which is also very useful, to understand that, so that we can have a better intervention in terms of, uplifting people, or those who, who might need a further help. But beyond that, spiritually, continuously to us, what is the meaning of our life will also help us to live in the present meaningfully. So I guess that's where the quote is, and especially in this time of COVID, I think every day asking ourselves what is the meaning of life for today would be very helpful. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That was so powerful, and I think we definitely reflect on that in relation to what you mentioned about is it the zikr you were saying? Because that so here's a gift back to you, Liyana, of that beautiful quote that you shared. I know certain schools of the Catholic tradition, especially maybe the La Sallian tradition school, so St. John Baptist de La Salle, generally they start any prayer service by saying that remember that you're now and always in the most holy presence of God. So I think that complements your zikr very, very beautifully. And I think that's, as an interfaith advocate, I think that's something that you will appreciate very much.
Yes, it resonates very well. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're most welcome. Yeah. Hazirah, go ahead, your segment now.
All right, hold on.
Yeah, so Liyana, I'm not sure whether you've seen this before, but this is Hazirah's up there.
My attempt at trying to put together everything that has been said nicely. Okay, so in today's conversation, Ustazah Liyana shared a bit about the title Ustazah and what it means. So it's specific to Singapore context. It's not just about providing one's knowledge, but also to assess the local context and to help to interpret and understand and contextualize some of the things that are happening for the community in Singapore. And part of this involves being inclusive and sensitive to the multiracial, religious, and racial and multi-religious context in Singapore. So kind of like as a nice segue to this, we talked a bit about interfaith and Ustazah Liyana's interest in this. And for her, I think it really seems like a natural development in terms of like the curiosity and the enjoyment in getting to know other people. And this is a strong theme that kind of like carries through our entire conversation, because we talked a bit about, I guess, the desire to understand and connect with others. So specific to this and thinking about it in the COVID-19 context, like certain blessings were things like, oh, you know, having time to strengthen one's relationship with God. But also in the vein of relationships, she talks about how it's important for her to check in with her migrant brothers, and this provides the space to think about like practicing empathy and developing understanding, and like relationships that can sustain like one's own understanding as well. So kind of the flip side to COVID blessings and opportunities are COVID challenges. And there's also this idea of like the overlapping home office comfort work prayer space, and the solution to that is really just to be compassionate to yourself in terms of like understanding that, look, the physical space can be adapted but cannot be changed. So the best way to manage it is really to think about how it's just to accept that certain things will not go the way you might necessarily want them to, and that's perfectly fine. And another challenge that she kind of also raised is the idea of social skills being compromised, and it's very challenging to talk to people now because, like, you know, seeing someone in real life means you can read more things than just what they're saying. But the solution that Chris provided to that is that maybe silence is enough, which was something that we engaged on a bit more in terms of thinking about how we want to take stock with ourselves. So marrying that idea of silence being enough and the importance of being compassionate, Ustazah Liyana also shared the things that she thinks about when she wakes up, which I think will be helpful for all of us to like maybe also try and practice. The first is to think about 3 things for which one is grateful for. The second is the 3 things that I have to do for the day. So like your productivity list, your 3 point productivity list.
3 times 4.
3 times 4. Yeah.
It was 12.
Start with 3, everyone. Okay. And then the last one she shared is 3 things that she looks forward to that she can do for herself in terms of self-care, which is very, very helpful, I guess, to like space out your day also. And then we talked a bit about gratitude for others in relation, especially to her first point about like 3 things that she's grateful for. So, you know, to be grateful to God, to be grateful to others, and to also be grateful to yourself for the things that you can and you cannot do. And we also just ended off on this very, very lovely note about thinking about reflecting and thinking about living in the present meaningfully. Yes.
Wow,
Yes.
that was mind-blowing.
Right? Amazing, right? Mind-blowing is a great word, Liyana. Yeah, it was fantastic. And I thought maybe to conclude our wonderful conversation for today. So Liyana, just to share with you, the Birthday Collective, we really are a heart, head and hands thrust. And so I was wondering, a very nice closure to this very beautiful, very sacred, very present conversation would be maybe if you could take some time with each other, so maybe to share one call to action, either maybe in the heart, the hand, or the head perspective, or if integration of all 3 is fine too, that we would do, you know, in the coming week as a call to action for today's conversation.
Okay. Well, because my background has always, you know, about building relationship with people, that has always been not just a priority, but it's also a passion. So I think, you know, and of course, if we look currently at the context out there, there's so much topic that is related about the struggle in trying to understand these differences. For example, on the issues of like racism, on the issues of color, on the issues of people who are being left out in COVID-19, like people who stays in rental flats, migrant brothers. There are many, you know, there are many segments in the society that we have yet to have a better understanding. We've done, you know, we have done some efforts, but it is still work in progress. So perhaps, I guess, as an individual, it would also be nice to also take time to have a little bit more understanding. Perhaps find a space where you can have a more conversation with the people that you've never known, people that you hardly, you know, that you hardly talk about, but then they also exist, and they are actually part of the people that you integrate as part of the society. talking about like millennials, where most of us have access to social media. And you also see a couple of these groups, they are also in the social media. So perhaps that can be an opportunity, because I guess before COVID, you don't really see much of this. But now when people have more time in social media, people talk about it. There's videos, there's reflection, there's observation. That can be something useful for us to, to talk about, because when we are going to face this COVID in a long time, it's not just about us and our family. Also, collectively as a society, because whatever the environment that we live in, it will impact the whole of us. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Liyana. I think my call to action for this week would be actually it's a very small, but I reckon significant point, reflecting on what Liyana shared today. The next time my nostrils capture something that is not very familiar to me, I will remember the wise words of Liyana and be grateful that I can smell. Rather than necessary, and in time to come, because I don't think this week I will reach there yet, but in time to come, I hope I will be able to also be grateful and exclaim, right, with that joy that Liyana was saying earlier, that, oh wow, what a fragrant smell, what a fragrant scent. Yeah, so that's my call to action this week. Yeah. Yeah. Hazirah?
Oh my God. No, I was going to say, I feel like what I had in mind is also just kind of similar to what Chris shared. In that, okay, for me, it's not like really, it's not the sense of smell, but because my neighbors are all very like clustered close together, because that's just the construction of the house. So occasionally, like, I hear things, or rather, like, I hear the sound of my neighbor blowing his nose, I think, when he's in the shower, and it's very loud. And for the longest time, I was thinking like, oh my God, uncle, are you okay? But now I think I'm just going to be grateful that, like, he's alive, that I can hear this, and that, he must be healthy, right? Because if he keeps doing this every day, and that he's well, that happens at more or less the same time every day. So I guess I'm grateful for uncle and his routine, and that he's well enough to carry on with it. So yeah. I will remember that, instead of going, oh my God, Yeah.
Oh gosh, and with that note, we have reached the end of this particular session of the Birthday Salon. So once again, thank you so much, Liyana, for your generosity, for your time, for your words of wisdom. Hazirah and I are truly, truly grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, for this opportunity. I'm really grateful that I don't really seem to realize that time has passed. We're talking. But I guess, yeah, it really seems that it's a conversation by itself. So I really appreciate, and I really learned a lot from your your sharings and your remarks, and I also hope to be a continuous learner in this process. Yes.
Yeah, likewise. I'm sure we have learned so much from you today, Liyana, along with all of our viewers and our listeners. So till the next time, we'll see you for the next Birthday Salon session. Bye-bye.